In this video, I want to have a look at negative powers or negative indices. So that's looking at expressions like, for example, 2 to the power of minus 3 or x to the power of minus 10, where that power or index is a negative number. So to figure out what that actually means, we're going to have a look at some examples. So we'll start off looking at the pattern. If we had 2 cubed, we know that that would give us 8. If we had 2 squared, that gives us 4. If we had 2 to the power of 1, we know that that gives us 2. And we know that 2 to the power of 0, or anything to the power of 0, is going to give us 1. So when we go into the negatives, we can look at this pattern that's happening to figure out what this is going to be equal to. So if we look at these numbers down the side, we can see that each time we're dividing by 2. So if we divide this by 2 to get down to this next one, we would have a half. Then if we looked at 2 to the power of minus 2, we'd divide this a half by 2. So a half divided by 2 would give us 1/4. We could also rewrite that as 1 over 2 to the power of 2, because 2 to the power of 2 is 4. So we could look at that same pattern again. If we had, say, a base of 3, then we'd be dividing by 3 each time. So that would mean that 3 to the power of minus 1 would be 1/3. 3 to the power of minus 2 would be 1 over 9, because a third divided by 3 is 9. But that's the same thing as writing 1 over 3 squared. So see that we're bringing it down the bottom and it's becoming a positive power. So 3 to the power of minus 2 is the same as 1 over 3 squared. So that power stayed the same, but it's positive. So if we had, say, 3 to the power of minus 3, that would be 1 over 27, because we're going 1/9 divided by 3. But that's the same thing as 1 over 3 cubed. So to write that more generally, we could write x to the power of minus 1 is equal to 1 over x. X to the power of minus 2 is equal to 1 over x squared. Or even more generally, so the general case, is that x to the power of minus n is equal to 1 over x to the power of n. So it's the reciprocal and the power becomes positive. Let's have a look at a few examples. So our first one says simplify 5 to the power of minus 3. So we know that the 5 to the power of minus 3 can be rewritten as 1 over 5 cubed. And 5 cubed is 5 times 5 times 5 would be 125. So simplified is 1 over 125. Next example asks us to simplify 3 over 2 to the power of minus 2. So if we rewrite that, we want the reciprocal, so 2 over 3, all to the positive power, so that would just be squared now. Now when we've got a fraction to a power, we're going to square the top and the bottom, so that power applies to the numerator and denominator. So 2 squared is 4, and 3 squared is 9. So this simplifies to 4 over 9. Our third example asks us to write 5m all to the power of minus 3 without a negative index. So because that power applies to that whole 5m term, that means that this whole thing is going to go into the denominator. So we're going to have 1 over 5m all cubed. Now we could expand that out as well to have it as 1 over 125m cubed. So we've got the cubed applying to the 5 as well as the m, or we can just leave it in brackets. Our next example is a little bit different because that power, that negative 6, only applies to the k, not the 2, because there's no brackets around it. So when we rewrite this, the 2 is going to stay in the numerator, and the k is going to come down the bottom, and that 6 will become positive. So you've just got to be careful whether the power applies to the whole thing or only part of it. In our next example, we're doing the opposite. So it's asked us to write this expression with a negative index. So because that squared applies to the whole 8x, we're going to have 8x in brackets to the power of minus 2. Our last example is just again being careful what that power applies to. So if we write that, press the wrong button. If we rewrite that with a negative index, that 3 is going to stay in the denominator, but the b will come up the top to the power of minus 7, and we'll have that 3 down the bottom. So b to the power of minus 7 over 3. So that's an introduction to looking at negative powers.